There are few more prehistoric-looking creatures swimming in the ocean than the sea turtle. It has a head like a dinosaur, a beak like a parrot, and looks like a tortoise, with flippers. Many animals survive as predators, relying on sharp teeth and claws to catch their prey. But turtles and tortoises have a different approach. They've evolved nature's ultimate defense strategy. The armor-plated shell has kept them safe for over 200 million years. But today, that's beginning to change.
They face the constant threat of being caught in fishing nets, in fishing hooks, or being run down by boats. In all, in fact, every year, tens of thousands of turtles perish unnecessarily. We'll be investigating what happened to one giant leatherback turtle that very tragically died a few days ago.
And by revealing its anatomy, we'll find out why a kidney-like organ sits where its brain should be, how its throat can withstand deadly jellyfish, and how it got its extraordinary shell.
Join us as we go deep inside the giant turtle.
Florida, the Sunshine State. With hundreds of miles of golden sands, beachfront condos and every water sport on offer, this is a paradise for holidaymakers. But it's all bad news for the sea turtle. They're being squeezed out of their prime nesting spots. And even out at sea, they're not safe from danger. But if you thought Floridians don't care about what happens to the turtles, you'd be wrong. They go to extreme lengths to save them. Emergency response units are on call 24 hours a day. And dedicated turtle hospitals treat the sick and injured. But sadly, not all their patients make it back out to sea. When turtles die on this coast, many of them end up in the freezer of Jeanette Wyneken, an anatomist from the Florida Atlantic University.
The first leatherback I ever worked on, I transported in the back of my car. I'll never do that again. Ever.
As a child, Jeanette was fascinated by dinosaurs. When she learnt they were extinct, she quickly settled for the next best thing. She's invited us to help her dissect a giant turtle that was picked up a few days ago.
God, it's hot when you get out, isn't it?
Yeah, sure is.
Really warm. So where is the freezer? Here.
Right back here.
The last big turtle that I had anything to do with was a terrapin about that size. So and I thought that was big.
This is going to scale up a wee bit. So.
My God. That is absolutely colossal. It's a monster. Is that...
That's a...
Normal, that's normal.
That's normal. That is an adult male leatherback turtle.
You've got to have a look at this. It is absolutely monstrous. That's 1.5 meters, isn't it?
Oh, it's 2 meters total.
2 meters total. That is a huge animal. But we have to get it to the lab.
Yes, we got to get.
So we're going to get it on this trailer.
That's
How
right.
heavy is this?
It's probably around 350 kilograms to 400 kilograms.
That's the weight of a horse. So is it going to be a lift from the edge of the shell job?
Well,
or?
actually, it's on wheels.
Oh, is it?
We were clever enough, thanks
That's
to
a hell
these
of an
guys.
evolutionary trick, isn't it?
Yes.
To develop with your own wheels for when you're dead to move you around.
Yeah, so why don't we get a couple of you guys tugging on these ropes?
Mind your fingers. Okay. Okay, let's go. 2-hour trip down the road. It's absolutely sweltering. The leatherback is the world's largest turtle. This one struggled ashore alive after being hit by a speedboat. The propeller sliced off his front flipper. Despite the rescue team's best efforts, he died the next day. We've taken the carcass to a post-mortem room purpose-built for dissecting marine mammals.
You just get a real sense when we've unpacked the tarpaulin of just how massive this turtle is. It's colossal. Absolutely colossal.
We'll have to leave this to thaw overnight before we can explore what lies under its shell. As darkness descends on Florida's beaches, the ocean begins to stir. I've come to witness one of nature's most magical events.
This is Mark, say again, over.
I'm joining Simon Watt and Joy Reidenberg to help a group of scientists search for females coming ashore to lay eggs.
Carefully, don't step on anything dark.
Yeah, I'm terrified I'm going to hear a crunch sound or something.
An hour into the patrol, there's a sighting.
Hello, Mark. Yes, I have a loggerhead sea turtle here. She's at the beach.
Oh, that's brilliant news. Where are you?
DCF kilometer 8.3. How soon can you be here?
5 minutes over. Wow. Oh, she's huge.
Well, we'll see.
She is huge. Just look at this. I mean, I've watched lots and lots of animals around the world, some incredible sights, but this is right at the top of the list.
It's amazing to get this close to a wild animal.
Yeah.
It's almost like she doesn't care about us.
She doesn't seem to be registered. I'm glad that these lights are kind of beyond her reach, you'd think.
How many other 300-pound vertebrates can you get up this close to? And if you do it right, you pose no threat or to her, and she is totally unaggressive.
So she's got quite a clutch down there already. I mean,
Yes, she'll lay as many as 3 or 4 at a time. So many that you can't actually count them with the naked eye. Marine turtles lay more eggs than any other kind of turtle, any other kind of reptile. And that's because they know that they're going to lose a lot. We think that only 1 in 10,000 makes it to maturity to come back here and breed in 25 years.
so the strategy is very simple. Just produce as many as you can on the hope that one maybe will make it through its entire life cycle to come back to this beach as a female and carry on the next generation.
That's exactly right.
It's an incredible statistic, and one which we hope to investigate further as we delve into the turtle's life story. In fact, the sea turtle's brief forays onto land are the legacy of its distant ancestors, as Richard Dawkins explains.
All modern sea turtles and land tortoises are descended from ancient land tortoises that lived in the early days of the dinosaurs. Some of them then went to the water, in which respect they resemble whales and manatees, dugongs, sea lions, and so on. Unlike whales, sea turtles still retain, as it were, one foothold on the land. They have to come back to the land to lay their eggs, and so that's a betrayal of their ancient land heritage.
You would never think that you get this close to something so rare. It's really strange, you know. I try not to personify animals, but you kind of can't help but feel a bit emotional when you watch something like this laying eggs. She just sprayed us, didn't she? Yeah.
As the female covers her eggs, the scientists move in to measure and tag her so they can monitor the breeding population.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and put these in here right now.
Terrific.
I'm going to go in. I'm going to
Whoa.
insert it.
No, good girl, stay
That's
still.
okay. It's all good.
So she's tagged.
Yep, now she's tagged.
So if you ever come back, we're going to know.
Got it. Ah, there she goes.
Once her eggs are safely buried, she returns to the sea. Back at the post-mortem room, the giant leatherback has thawed out. Now we can begin the dissection to try to understand how this animal evolved its defensive anatomy. Marine vet Nancy Metty has been called in from one of Florida's top turtle hospitals. She suspects there may have been something wrong with this turtle before it was hit by the boat.
Right, Nancy, the trauma here, if you peel that back, is pretty obvious.
It's obviously propeller strikes. We've got parallel sequential cuts through the shell and then into the soft tissue also, and actually traumatically amputating the left front flipper.
The fact that it got such trauma up the front end here says what to you?
Typically what a sea turtle will do is attempt to evade a boat. When they hear the sound and their hearing is very good in the water, they will begin to dive. I think this turtle was not evading this boat, or not even making an attempt to evade. Potentially could have had some sort of a flotation problem, which was preventing it from being driven underwater by the force of the blade.
Nancy, would this guy have survived if it hadn't been so traumatic, the injury from the prop, and just lost the flipper? Would it have survived or not?
Leatherbacks, because of their enormous size, don't do well with any flipper amputation of the front, whereas other species, smaller species like the loggerheads or the greens, actually can do very well with an amputated front flipper.
This loggerhead turtle had both its front flippers sliced off after being caught in a fishing net in Japan. Its swimming was severely impaired until scientists came to the rescue. They created a pair of prosthetic flippers and attached them to the parts of the arm bones that could still move. The loggerhead took to the artificial adaptation immediately. But unfortunately, our leatherback was beyond surgery.
Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
To go inside a turtle, you first need to turn it over onto its back. We're going to remove the internal anatomy layer by layer until we end up with an empty shell. We start by removing the lower protective layer.
Just lift the other end, Joy. How heavy is that?
Can't even get a grip on her.
That's quite a weight, isn't it?
Joy, who's more familiar with the insides of large whales than giant turtles, is surprised by her first impressions.
Think of a turtle shell as having bone all the way around. There's some bone right over here, but what's really amazing is this part is just fat. So a turtle shell made out of fat is very unusual. In fact, it looks a lot like a marine mammal because it seems to have a blubber layer.
In most sea turtles, the lower shell is made up of 9 bones, which are fused together to form a solid plate. But in the leatherback, these bones are reduced to a ring around the edge. Filling in is this layer of fat, which not only covers the belly, but encircles the entire body. But what's it for?
Leatherbacks are really unusual in that they are able to maintain a warmer body temperature than the environment. It's generating heat through its muscle action, and that core of heat is basically being trapped to a certain extent by this blubber layer.
So by having a big blubber layer, it's like wearing its own winter jacket. Even though we think of it as a cold-blooded reptile, it's actually not cold inside. No. It's maintaining heat inside.
That is essential if you're going up to the waters off of Portugal or Africa. Some of those waters are quite cold, but they're very rich. It's a good place to feed. And if you're a reptile that's got to feed there, you've got to maintain enough body temperature to function.
Protected by their thermal shield of fat, leatherbacks have been able to conquer the oceans. Leaving Florida's sunny beaches behind, they swim right across the Atlantic to our British shores, where they come to feed on jellyfish, which flourish in our cool seas. In fact, the largest leatherback ever known was found in these waters. This giant, caught on a fishing line off the coast of Wales in 1988, was thought to be 100 years old and weighed almost a ton. Being big is another way these turtles deal with the cold.
Reptiles are traditionally described as cold-blooded, but that's rather misleading. They're not so good at regulating their temperature as mammals and birds are. Lizards do it by moving into the sun to get warm, moving out of the sun to get cool. Now, a large animal, and this probably includes large reptiles like dinosaurs and indeed leatherback turtles, large animals can retain heat because the surface area of the body is relatively small compared to the volume of the body, and leatherback turtles really could be called almost warm-blooded.
But leatherbacks are by no means the largest turtles to have ever existed. That record belongs to this extinct relative, Archelon, who was 3 times bigger and roamed the seas 70 million years ago.
However big they get, all turtles start off tiny. After seeing the female lay her eggs the other night, I've come to Florida's Gulf Coast to find out about the next stage. Getting out to sea alive.
Hey, Eve.
Hey, how are you, Simon?
Not bad. Do you hand there?
Oh, absolutely. Here.
I've joined Eve Haverfield, a conservationist who dedicates her life to saving sea turtles. Every morning, she digs up nests that have hatched and counts how many baby turtles made it out. First, she shows me some of the dangers they face whilst they're still in the egg.
Those little reddish things are fire ants, and they hurt and they can decimate an entire nest of hatchlings.
Wow. And that hole, is that a crab?
Yes.
So this nest has not had it easy?
It has not had it easy. We may not either if this crab is still in here. Yeah, could be carnage in here.
So are these crabs going to go for us?
They could. If you go ahead and stick your finger in there, Simon. They could. You could end up with a crab on your finger. It doesn't really hurt. It's just more surprising.
Yeah. I'd rather not be surprised, though.
I know.
Whoa. Can't go and do it to us. Are you okay?
I'm fine. I'm sorry.
Don't apologise. That gave me a fright as well, actually, just seeing that thing.
It just, as I said, the element of surprise.
Yeah. Even before they hatch, the attrition rate is high. Actually, I've got quite a few here. Oh, no, that's bad news as well. These are unhatched, and this one, yeah, that looks just there.
That's been attacked by fire ants. Some hatchlings got out, but I'm not surprised that we're going to be seeing some abnormal eggs. Oh, shoot. We had a storm here at the beginning of August. These little guys apparently had already hatched out of the egg, but not out of the nest, and obviously they drowned. They cannot tolerate, an extended time period underwater. This is so sad. This is not good. But this is nature. I can accept this. I don't like it, but I can accept this more easily than I can something that is done by humans. This is nature. This is part of this happened throughout the eons.
Getting out of the nest alive is just the start. A hazardous race to the sea lies ahead. Natural selection ensures only the hatchlings with the best adapted genes survive running this gauntlet. One by one, they're picked off. And just when they think they've reached safety, the ocean's many predators attack. It's thought that only a quarter of the hatchlings will see past their first day. Where they go next is still a mystery. Young turtles are rarely seen. Scientists call this part of their life cycle the lost years, a time when they find food to grow big enough to fend for themselves.
This is the most weird looking mouth I have ever seen.
It is kind of a showstopper.
The head is where we'll begin our investigation into how these animals are able to grow so big on a jellyfish diet. Joy wants to look at its feeding anatomy.
So we've taken the head of this turtle off, and I want to take you on the tour of the feeding apparatus because it's actually quite interesting. So the first thing you notice right away is that there's no teeth on this animal, not like you see in a mammal, but there are these pointy extensions that are sticking out of the front and also on the top and the bottom. These are acting like teeth. They can certainly slice, and you can see how it's like a big parrot beak as it goes back and forth like this. In fact, if I were to put my finger here, I think I'd lose it because that's pretty sharp. What's really interesting is that as this animal is biting and taking a slice out of the jellyfish, it needs to squeeze the water out of its mouth because it doesn't want to drink all of that seawater. So it's going to actually push the floor of the mouth up and squeeze the water out. And then when you go inside, there's more pointiness. All of this is actually quite bizarre. All of these pointy things here are going to help push the jellyfish down, keep them from coming back up. It's a one-way trip. And not only does it start right here at the mouth, but it goes all the way down the esophagus and all the way down to the stomach.
Jellyfish have been roaming the seas for over 500 million years. They're found in every ocean, from the shallows to the deep, and can gather in blooms 100,000 strong. These tentacled beasts are amongst the most venomous creatures on Earth. So with all the seafood to choose from, it's odd that turtles developed a taste for them. Why turtles are immune to the sting remains a mystery. But what's remarkable is how leatherbacks can fuel their giant bodies on this diet. There's not much to a jellyfish. It contains 95% water, so it's a bit like eating nothing but cucumbers.
Can I have a little feel inside here? Because I want to feel what it's like to be a jellyfish.
Yeah, be careful if you try to come back out. It's very sharp and pointy.
Ooh, that is really
It's a one-way path, Mark. You might not be able to get your hand out easily.
That is weird.
Do I have to cut you out?
That is very, very strange.
These are very, very sharp.
We're going to follow the length of the deeply strange digestive system to find out how the leatherback manages on such a low-energy diet.
So if we follow that underneath the windpipe or trachea, we see just the esophagus right here. And we're going to follow that underneath the heart. We're going to pull that to the side. So as it runs under the liver, you can see my hand emerging again here. There's the continuation of the esophagus right here. So it continues around this corner like this, comes back up here where the propeller had cut through the esophagus, so you still see those pointy things in the esophagus here, loops around again here, goes again under this piece of liver, and eventually ends up in the stomach, comes back around on this side.
It turns out the leatherback has an extraordinarily convoluted digestive tract. In other animals, the food pipe leads directly from the mouth to the stomach. But in the leatherback, it takes a circuitous course around the stomach, making it 6 times longer than other sea turtles.
It is already looking phenomenally long. Joy, it's funny, isn't it? It doesn't matter how many times you do this, it never ceases to amaze me how many miles of digestive system there are inside of an animal. We've got the whole of the digestive system now out on the table, and look at this. This is the inside of the esophagus, or the food pipe going from the mouth down to the stomach. And I tell you, if I showed a photograph of that to 20 of my mates who are vets and said, what is that? They would never in a million years say it was the inside of an esophagus. It is the weirdest thing I have ever seen inside an animal.
It's totally sea turtle.
And they go from really quite small here up near the mouth, and as you get kind of 2 feet in here, they are absolutely colossal. I mean, look at that. It's like a finger. Very pointy, and then down at the base of it, there's
many-
loads more. And it's incredibly thick, the wall.
Yes, and keep in mind, many of them are feeding in cold areas, and so you actually see the muscular wall and then this insulating fat. So if these animals can insulate and not lose body heat as the food comes in, especially when they're bringing in cold water, they're saving energy.
It's an insulated food pipe.
It's an insulated food
pipe. It's
pipe.
so cool.
This long, spiky food pipe is the key to how this turtle can cope with its diet of jellyfish. For this giant, its feeding philosophy is quantity, not quality. To prevent its stomach filling with seawater, the food pipe acts as a temporary storage vat. When it fills, muscles squeeze the water out, whilst the finger-like papillae keep the jellies in, before they're then passed into the stomach. This unique adaptation allows the leatherback to eat its body weight in jellyfish in just one day. There's very little in this turtle's stomach, but something else catches Nancy's eye.
So Nancy, what have you got down here?
Well, we're still examining the mucosal surface here of the stomach, and there are these black lesions here which can be typical for some sort of worm eggs. These creamy white ones are more classic for tapeworm infested larvae, so we'll be biopsying those as well.
Anything in here, Nancy, that you're seeing at the moment gives you seen possible parasites. That's any indication about this animal being unwell enough to be underweight?
Not necessarily. You know, parasites are typical for wild animals, so we don't necessarily, unless it's an overwhelming parasitemia, we don't necessarily consider it a cause of death. It could be part of why they were ill, but it rarely is the cause.
From parasites to predators, there's not a lot that can kill an adult turtle. Apparently, not even old age. In the sea, they can live to 100. And on land, giant tortoises can live over 2 centuries, making them the longest living of all large animals. It's even possible that some still alive today may have seen Charles Darwin when he visited the Galapagos Islands in 1835. The secret to their long life is not just a protective shell, but remarkably strong organs, which don't break down as they age. Slow and steady really can win the race. It seemed like nothing could touch them, until man came along. For centuries, pirates, whalers and explorers stocked up their ships with them. They weren't just easy to hunt and tasty to eat. These reptiles can survive without food or water for up to a year, which made them the perfect livestock for the long voyages at sea. In the Galapagos Islands alone, 200,000 giant tortoises were killed in just 3 centuries of slaughter.
When it comes to survival, the odds are really stacked against the sea turtles. Their nests are invaded by ferocious fire ants and crabs that devour their eggs. Those unlucky enough to emerge to the surface are easy pickings for birds. And those that make it as far as the sea face the ferocious jaws of sharks and fish and even other turtles. But if you think you couldn't make a bad situation worse, some turtles face another hurdle, because that is the Gulf of Mexico. And out there, there's oil. In 2010, an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig unleashed a vast slick of crude oil, covering an area the size of Scotland, smothering marine life. President Obama called the tragedy the environmental equivalent of 9/11.
We will not rest until this well is shut, the environment is repaired, and the cleanup is complete.
Although the rig was 60 kilometers off the coast, so much oil was released that it took only 6 weeks for it to start washing up on the beaches. A turtle disaster loomed. Once they hatched, a whole generation of turtles would head straight into the deadly sludge. With no time to spare, a rescue operation was launched. The plan was for hundreds of volunteers to try to dig up all the eggs laid over the nesting season and transport them across the state from the devastated beaches of the Gulf of Mexico, 800 kilometers, to the oil-free Atlantic coast. Here, NASA's Kennedy Space Center joined the rescue efforts, offering its temperature-controlled facility where the eggs could complete their incubation until they hatched. 70,000 turtles now had a second chance in life. Fortunately for Eve, her hatchlings here in southwest Florida escaped the catastrophe.
In this area, the oil did not present itself here as an oil slick. It may be on the floor of the Gulf, but it's not here on the surface, and that's why we're able to let them go into the Gulf rather than relocating them.
Yeah, but that's incredible crisis biology, that idea of taking them from one coast and putting them on another just because there's nothing else you can do. The decision to move the eggs was made knowing it could upset one of nature's most mysterious migrations. As adults, turtles return to the coasts where they were born to lay their own eggs. So whether the rescued hatchlings will find their way back to the beaches where they were laid, or where they swam out to sea, remains to be seen. Should they return, they will do so for the most important part of their life cycle: mating.
One of the most amazing things about this is we basically have this animal that lives in a box. And when they mate, you have to get 2 boxes to fit together. So when a female accepts the male, he climbs on her back. But then you've got all this shell in the way. And so they actually have a very large internal penis that becomes externalized. And it's a pretty impressive structure.
It's certainly larger than I thought it would be for a turtle, but it's not nearly as big as it is in a whale. Because whales don't have this whole box problem. The whole problem they have is that they just have to reach each other, and they're so big-bodied.
Yes.
But with the turtles, I can certainly see that would be a problem. But doesn't this have to then bend to get around
Absolutely.
to the female? So how does it do that?
It's mobile.
So it's got muscles in it.
It's got muscles in it, exactly.
And prehensile penis. Okay, well now they're getting more like whales.
This groove is the groove for delivery of sperm.
Oh, so it's not internal into a tube. It's actually just a trough.
It's a trough.
So the sperm could spill out of this trough?
Well, it's internalized into the female.
Okay.
When engorged, it does become much more tube-like. You know, at this point, there really isn't the congestion of blood that you'll see when they're mating.
The penis of this pet tortoise can be seen to reach half the length of its shell, and it's tipped with a bulbous end which helps lock into the female. Although sometimes males struggle to find the right mate. Joining 2 boxes together is quite a challenge on land. When turtles mate underwater, it's a far more graceful affair.
So how long does the actual coupling take? Have we watched this? Hours. So they're actually, they're intertwined for hours in the water.
In the water.
They're swimming in concert while they're mating. It's very
Well,
romantic.
I don't know if they're swimming in concert, but it's her job to get them to the surface to breathe.
They'd have to be. I mean, have you ever tried to paddle a canoe with somebody that's not paddling with you? It doesn't work out very well.
As elegant as it looks, having sex underwater has its risks. Jealous rival males will exploit a mating pair's need to come to the surface to breathe, and they'll force them apart. Interestingly, a female welcomes the competition. She'll mate with several males.
About 10 days to 2 weeks after mating, the females come ashore and lay their eggs. They'll lay a clutch and then another clutch a few weeks later and another clutch a few weeks later.
Oh, wow. I thought it was just one.
No, it's a whole series of clutches.
Once the eggs are laid, they're abandoned and left to their own fate. Strangely, as the female heads back to sea, tears can often be seen running down her cheeks. Legend has it that these are tears of sadness. The mystery of why turtles cry can be solved by looking inside the head.
That's the height of neurosurgery in sea turtles right there. That's it.
So inside the head of the leatherback, you would expect to see primarily brain. But what you find is the brain was just in this little channel right in the middle, and the biggest things in the brain are the salt glands, which are effectively acting like kidneys. Different animals handle salt in different ways. The sea turtle, they have no choice but drinking salt water, taking salt water in. They have to get rid of the salt. Sometimes you'll hear about turtles coming up and crying while they're nesting. What you're really seeing is the products of these giant salt glands. The material that comes out of those glands is a viscous, salty tear. It's the excess salts. And in the water, of course, you don't see them because they're being washed away. But on land, the tears will accumulate and it makes the turtle look like it's crying.
It's hard to believe that this head could ever have evolved to house kidney-like organs. But perhaps the strangest evolutionary puzzle is how the turtle got its shell. Before we try to piece that together, we're going to see how the turtle adapted to life underwater.
There's very little left inside the shell apart from 2 lungs, which to me look incredibly small for what is a kind of, expert diver.
They look small to me too.
Yeah?
Let's see what happens when we put some air in them. Oh, wow.
Well, that's incredible.
That looks much more like what I was expecting. See how quickly it just recoils and drives the air out. One of the characteristics of sea turtle lungs is they're highly elastic, and that's one of the ways they can bring air in quickly and get rid of it quickly. Because when these animals come to the surface, they exhale.
They're breathing like we would sneeze all at once.
Yes.
These bellow-like lungs enable leatherbacks to hold their breath for up to 30 minutes and dive to over 1,000 meters. But we've noticed there's something wrong with this leatherback's lungs.
Okay, so we got quite a big leak out here.
Yeah, that lung's a lot smaller.
Yeah.
It looks like the boat propeller penetrated the shell and sliced through this lung. Nancy wants to take a closer look for the post-mortem.
Well, this is the left lung that's been removed from the body. This wound right here was actually created by the propeller, and as the lung was inflated, you could see air escaping from the lung here. That was actually happening during life as well. Each time the sea turtle would inhale, air would be released into the body cavity. The lung was failing to inflate properly. Suffocation could be a cause of death. Blood loss could be a cause of death. The amount of trauma here is tremendous. And it was just a matter of this turtle being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
On the beach, Simon and Eve are still hoping to save some lives. They're looking for any hatchlings trapped inside their nests.
And there it is.
Batch of shells. That's a sign that at least some of them have made it out. Hopefully many more.
Got one. Got one.
Oh,
baby, honey. Welcome. Welcome. Hello, hello. Oh, did you just see what he did? Had his little flippers on the back? That's his camouflage. When they do this, they're resting and swimming out in the Gulf they'll put their little flippers on the back of their shell and they look like leaves so birds don't scoop them up as food. And underneath, they're relatively light so that as fish look up, they don't see this light air, so they're kind of camouflaged against the surface of the water. So they have many ways to hide.
This guy's a bit of a straggler, but lucky for him, we found him. We can take him out to the oceans to join his brothers and sisters.
Got another one. Oh, little guy.
The second hatchling looks a lot scrawnier than the first one we found. It's not uncommon for some to come out this way.
You know, it is going to be a survival of the fittest out there. If one is consumed by predators out there, but the robust one gets away while the other one is being consumed, then, you know, that's how it is. Our goal, of course, is to make sure that as many hatchlings as possible get into the Gulf.
Before we leave, Eve's keen to show me another miniaturized reptile that shares this beach.
This is a gopher tortoise. And unfortunately for the gopher tortoise, people sometimes mistake this as a sea turtle and they'll put the little guy in the water. Look at the difference. Claws
and flippers.
And flippers. Sea turtles have very strong flippers so that they can swim very fast, very deep.
Yeah.
Gopher tortoises, on the other hand, don't like water. They live on the land, and when people mistake them for sea turtles and put them in the Gulf, they can drown because they're not swimmers, they're crawlers.
There's an important evolutionary conundrum about turtles and tortoises. Did the turtle walk onto land to become the tortoise? Or did the tortoise swim into the sea to become the turtle?
It's a very surprising fact that modern land tortoises are not descended directly from the ancient land tortoises. Instead, modern land tortoises are descended from sea turtles. What happened was that the ancient land tortoises went to the sea, like whales and like manatees, and gave rise to the turtles. And then some of the sea turtles came out of the sea and gave rise to modern land tortoises. Now we know this because if you look at the DNA of modern turtles and modern land tortoises, the modern land tortoises come from within a nested subgroup of sea turtles. They're more closely related to some sea turtles than those sea turtles are to other sea turtles.
That leaves just one last mystery to solve.
Do you know, the leatherback soup bowl is now empty. Are we now close to being able to tell the story of how this amazing shell evolved?
Oh yes, you can see it pretty clearly now. Here's the vertebral column.
So that's the back. That's the backbone.
That's the backbone, and they're individual vertebrae. It's just like you and I do, except they don't bend much. And they're the ribs. This whole shell is a modified rib cage.
Very cool.
So it's like almost an armour growing around it to produce a shell on the outside that protects everything on the inside, whereas we've got the rib cage protecting the delicate organs, but from a skeleton point of view, our shoulder blades and everything are on the outside of that. So We're just kind of the opposite.
We're the opposite.
Turtles and tortoises are not the only vertebrates to have developed armour plating, but there's a real puzzle as to how they managed to do it. Because unlike, say, armadillos, turtles and tortoises have developed the shell from the ribs, and since it completely encloses them, there's a puzzle as to how they managed to get the armour plating outside the arms and legs.
The answer lies in the peculiar way the bones develop. In most animals, including humans, the ribs grow by bending and tucking inside the shoulder blade. But in turtles, the shoulder blades are pushed further inside the body, allowing the ribs to grow around them. Meanwhile, the belly bones develop below. So that's how the arms and legs end up inside the shell. In hard-shelled turtles, the ribs expand and fuse to form a solid bone box. But in the leatherback, the ribs remain unconnected and are covered in a soft, leathery skin.
It's not hard-shelled, but it's a firm shell, and it's a flexible shell.
So there's enough movement. It's like you've got the ribs, but with gaps in it, enough to allow some movement,
Exactly.
so that it can compress when it dives without cracking.
Exactly, and you can see, I can move this a little bit and nothing's going crack pop.
This armoured shield is one of evolution's greatest riddles. But like every great riddle, there's one final twist.
Given that we think sea turtles evolved from land tortoises that had shells, it's rather puzzling that there's one marine fossil called Odontocheilus, lived about 220 million years ago, that seems to have half a shell. It's got a shell on the lower part of the body, but not on the back of the body. Maybe it was guarding against predators that swooped from beneath or something of that sort. Nevertheless, it is a puzzle. Where does it fit in the evolution of turtles? Did it perhaps evolve from an ancestor that had two shells and lose the top half of the shell? Or what happened? We don't know.
This is an extraordinary evolutionary story, isn't it? And a brilliant adaptation to where these guys live. But the sad fact is you can have 230 million years of evolution, but if your anatomy comes into contact with a spinning propeller, you don't stand a chance.
Absolutely. Yeah, the carapace is a great design for protecting the turtle, but up against a speedboat, it really doesn't offer that much protection, and we need to do what we can to protect these animals.
In our final foray before leaving Florida, Joy and I join Simon to release the stragglers rescued earlier. Further up the coast, the hatchlings saved from the oil disaster are also being released. For these disorientated youngsters, which beach they'll try to return to as adults remains to be seen. But for those that make it back, they'll be the lucky winners of one of nature's toughest lotteries.
Swallowed by the sea.
Meet the British blind football squad tomorrow at 10. Best of British, Channel 4, looking forward to next year's Paralympic Games. Tonight at 10, Jackson goes mad at the exact wrong moment. Social worker pop-up in Shameless. Next though, just 20, but she's crammed a lot in. Laura is one of the 7 dwarves.